Namaskar and welcome to Sunset Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the issue of freebies and the impact it has on the economy. In fact, Supreme Court has said that there is a need for an apex body consisting of members from Niti Aayog, Finance Commission, ruling and opposition parties, the RBI and other stakeholders as well, for suggestions on how to control freebies by political parties during campaigns. Hearing a plea against the practice of political parties promising freebies during elections, the Apex Court bench headed by CJI and Veeramanna said that this panel is required to determine the pros and cons of freebies, as these have a significant impact on the economy. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has also raised his concerns on the practice of using freebies for votes at the cost of long-term development. Recently, PM Modi had flagged this particular issue while pointing to the mounting dues of power distribution companies or power discoms as a looming crisis. According to a study based on the data of major financial assistance, cash transfers, utility subsidies, loan or fee waivers and interest-free loans announced by the state governments in their respective budget speeches, the expenditure on freebies range from 0.1 to 2.7% of the GSTP for different states. So what exactly is the concept of freebies and how do they impact the overall economic situation? For more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel today. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Mr. Amarjeet Sinha, our former advisor in the Prime Minister's office, is with us. We also have with us Sandeep Fukan, a senior journalist. Welcome, both of you gentlemen. I'll begin with you, Mr. Sinha. And as I was saying, let's start by understanding a bit more about not only the scope, but also the concept of freebies. What all constitutes freebies? How do you define it?
Basically, any developing nation, resource needs are there for infrastructure, for human development, and for removing, say, the asset base of the poor or for social protection. Now, in this whole exercise, resources are never infinite. There's a finite amount of resources that you have. And if the resources are finite, and given the requirements for developing nations to grow faster, as also to secure higher levels of well-being for its citizens, somewhere or the other, prioritization is a necessity in public policy. Democracies, by very nature, cater to constituencies, to voters. And from that perspective, democracies always have a challenge of balancing what the state performs in terms of what the demands of the citizens are.
Okay.
So from that point of view, the notion of freebies is a relative term. It's relative, but there are priority areas which you have to learn from how other countries have moved forward. And that's where prioritization becomes important. The East Asian miracle that we talk about, why South Korea and others have moved forward so quickly, all studies indicated the role of, say, human development and a proactive state, which means that you can't afford to neglect human development. Likewise, our country has sizable infrastructure deficits and asset base of the poor in terms of housing, in terms of electricity, in terms of safe cooking gas, in terms of sanitation, in terms of roads, in terms of credit availability and so on. So clearly, anything which removes the asset deficits of deprived households adds to the overall economic activity and to a more equitable and inclusive society and development.
Okay.
So from that point of view, clearly infrastructure, asset base of the poor, and the third sector, the social protection that I mentioned about, for example, very large number of non-literate and non-skilled people are very old and infirm. So we need to provide pensions for them. That's not a freebie. That's a requirement of the system. Okay. A welfare state has to do that. But if your levels of income poverty are already low, for example, in the case of Punjab, and your public debt is very high, there are dangers. The danger is it completely, you're not able to expand your investments in human development. In Punjab, for example, when you compare with Himachal Pradesh, where human development has moved much faster, women's equality, empowerment, all these are challenges for Punjab as well. While it has been very successful on incomes, it has a lot more to do on social development. But if it puts all its resources for a particular activity, or most of it, then it'll not have resources left to do what is necessary for it to do.
Okay, we'll come to the states part as well, and we'll look at other states also. There are various other states wherein the freebies are almost around 2% of the GSDP, and we'll look at that aspect and try and understand how it can be done. But Sandeep, do you agree with Mr. Sinha here when he says that freebies is a relative concept? And when we say relative concept, of course, we will have to prioritize.
Absolutely. In fact, I think that freebie as the term, the term that we use very commonly, it has a negative connotation, as if you're throwing away something free of cost. I don't look at it like that at all. It entirely depends. Do you use, when you give tax waivers to industrialists, you call it what? A stimulus package, right? You don't call it freebie. You call it stimulus package. What is the argument behind stimulus package? That the government of the day will take a hit in terms of revenue. We will earn less revenue, but the money that you save on paying revenue, you create jobs. You increase your productive capacities. You give more employment. You
spurn the economy.
turn, you spurn the economy. Now, freebie is for whom? Freebie, and as we all know, there are no free lunches. At the end of the day, somebody is picking up the bill and it's the taxpayer. And even the person who gets something free, he or she, when he buys something, he pays indirect tax, GST, and that is also sort of partly funding whatever he has got from the government.
To the revenue of the government.
I totally agree with Mr. Sinha when he says that, when there are resource deficits, you have to the government has to be judicious in terms of giving access to health, access to education, access to, housing. It's only when you build their bases, only then you can say that, yes, this household has come up out of the poverty line and, the members can now earn better or perhaps compete better in the society. So, but when you talk about freebies by a political party, let's not pretend here that any political party is going to say, no, we are not going to do freebies. Look at the Uttar Pradesh elections. One of the biggest things that came about, you had a new constituency of Labharthi, or beneficiary. And who are these people? These were people who were reeling under loss of income because of sudden lockdown, because of corona, because of loss. They were not involved or engaged in any kind of productive capacities.
Okay.
So the government of the day decided that they will be given certain amount of ration-free, edible oil, pulses, etc. And that sort of endeared the voters to the ruling party. So, in fact, Labharthi became a constituency in itself. So, I think the term freebie that we use is essentially before elections, when any political party comes and says, we'll give you free color TV, we will give you this, that. I think one should not look at, it's a very thin line actually. Frankly, Vishal, it's a very thin line between what you call a welfare politics or welfare economics and what you call a freebie. So it's a thin line. If you can make outrageous promises as a political party, but as and when you come to power, you have to, come good on those promises, and whether the state can deliver. And, Sir cited the example of Punjab, and that's a case in point.
Indeed,
we saw that in the run-up to elections, free electricity was...
That's more important, as Sandeep is pointing out, that it's just not about, the political party or, the government of the day delivering on what it promised perhaps during the elections, but also whether or not the system or the coffers can, support those particular promises. But coming to that part, and then, going back to what you're saying earlier, Mr. Sinha, when we're talking about a thin line, as Sandeep was referring to, how do we draw that line? Because there's a huge gamut of subsidies. There's a fertilizer subsidy, there's a power subsidy, there's a subsidy to farmers, there's a subsidy on other things as well. And, as Sandeep was pointing out, stimulus packages for the industry, for the business houses as well. So where do we draw that line?
I think this is where, besides prioritization, and I agree with what Sandeep was saying, ultimately, everything is a cost to the government in the sense that even when you write off loans. So I think it's important that we address this. Therefore, when I was researching on the subject recently, I made the point about the ratio of direct and indirect taxes. How much do you tax households and how much do you tax goods? Because taxes on goods apply to everyone, whereas taxes on individuals and households apply to those who are in that bracket. It's important. And also some of these write-offs send the wrong message, that state has the resources for this but not for something else. But what has to be borne in mind, that if my subsidies, if the state's subsidies are actually leading to perverse incentives. Now, for example, a lot of people say that reforms in the power sector don't happen because of perverse incentives. When the distribution and the generating unit, all of them know that states will come forward to pay the bill, then there is no incentive on anybody to reduce or improve the efficiencies of the system. So one is a question of this. The two is, unlimited access to everybody. Now, this issue about Labharthi Varg, which Sandeep mentioned, as all of you are aware, the socio-economic census and the deprived households identified therein in 2015, it was started in 11 but completed in 15. Now, those deprived households are common for all the programs. Ujjwala Gas, Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana Gramin, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, the program Saubhagya for free electricity connections. Even the National Food Security Act, in about 8-9 states, they used a socio-economic census. In others, they have used other databases as well. But the important message there is that that also is not a universal program. NFSA, the free food grains, is for 50% of the rural population overall, nationally, and about 75% of the rural population and 50% of the urban. 3/4 of rural and half of urban, which is sizable. They are the ones who got the free grains. The aim there is, again, not a universal program of freebies. So freebies has something to do with universality as well. When what is public welfare comes in the realm of freebies, if you provide it even for those who don't deserve to get that, they could buy on their own, or where it interferes with the efficiency or effectiveness of that intervention. So both factors have also to be borne in mind. Having said that, it also depends on the economic capacities of states. There are some states which have attracted large investments, where even though the debt is high, they make it sustainable simply by ensuring increases in revenues. So returns on investments become important, whereas there are other states which are not able to attract enough investments. So as a consequence, in a manner, freebies become relative as well. If the capacity of the state is to provide many things and still remain sustainable on the public debt, that's a different challenge. But whereas, when you have these issues of very, very high public debt interfering with the ability of the state to do the right things, then naturally there is a crisis.
Okay. Sandeep, this looks like everything is a bit complicated, but it's interconnected. And when we're talking about drawing the line, as Mr. Sinha was referring to, there needs to be a lot of factors which need to be kept in mind. And of course, prioritization is one, but the other is also to focus on the socio-economic aspect.
Absolutely. See, some of these freebies that we come across are also incentives. For example, many states, including my home state of Assam, Bihar, so many other states, have promised that whoever passes out from the state boards, children, if they get a certain percentage, 60% or 70%, they get a free computer. Or now it has gone up to scooties. So now I think that free computer, there must have been a logic to the announcement, and the logic is that, at a time, and Corona has just shown us what technology can do, and and the digital divide. So those of us who had access to computers could easily sort of not see our children having disruptions, but households where they could not have access to computer or a smartphone, their children had to face disruptions in their academic pursuit, in their education. So there is a logic that people from economically marginal backgrounds, they will come up. They may not be able to buy a computer, so the government gives them a computer, and the student, that's an incentive. But if you start giving it to just about everyone, then that's a freebie. You have to make that distinction based on income criteria, based on socio-economic background, and then but that is not how it is. We've seen, I don't want to name parties, political parties here, but we've seen elections down south where you had television. So one party promised television, the other one said, no, we will give you color television. So one party promised pressure cooker, so someone else promised something else. So at the end of the day, Vishal, I think what is very important, and it's for policymakers and it's for the Election Commission to look at it very carefully, does it actually impact the level playing field in elections?
Okay.
Because the government of the day can always deliver on the promises because they have the access to resources of the state. But a party that is in the opposition, they can only make promises. And it's natural, it's human for a voter to think, जो मिल रहा है उसे ले लेते हैं वो आगे मिलेगा या नहीं who's seen and this is across the board.
Counter promises will be notch up higher and that would again have a lot of impact on the state exchequer.
One in hand is better than two what is being promised, right?
I mean, but that's a very, very significant point which he made, and if we since we trying to understand the freebie culture, the impact it has on the economy, and looks like for most of the part, there seems to be in the long run sort of a negative impact when we are looking at various sectors. There is a positive impact as well when we look at the social aspect of it, and of course a particular strata of the society or the citizens. But you go deeper into the genesis, and as Sandeep was referring to it, it all starts with promises made during elections. So therein comes what needs to be done. So it takes us back to that much debated concept or idea of electoral reforms.
No, in fact, that's important, but not. I would look at it in a larger frame. It's also about better governance. How can we make competing politics good economics as well? Or how can we make good politics, good social development as well? I think if I could illustrate with examples, say, our entire thrust on the livelihood mission, the women's self-help groups, just as one example, where essentially what we have been trying since 2011-12 and more so in the recent years, because this is what worked in the southern Indian states in bringing down poverty, where women's collectives are formed and how women's collectives play a role. Of course, in their formation itself, adolescent girls going to high schools and higher secondary schools makes a difference. The fertility rates come down when they go to high schools and higher secondary schools and higher education. The collectives get formed, and if they've done high school, they're able to also acquire vocational skills. Therefore, say in states like Tamil Nadu, you find that the employability is much higher. Investments always go to that state because you have a human capital available which is willing to work. Even the women's participation rates are higher than the national average. Likewise, along with this, when you provide credit or enterprise to these community collectives, it makes a difference.
Okay.
Now, what has happened as a consequence of it, over the last 7-8 years, we've pushed very strongly the rural livelihood mission all over the country. Today, my own home state of Bihar, one thing I'm very proud of is the Jivika movement, where women have come together. The expenditure on this mission is not very high because it doesn't believe in subsidies. Everything is against a bank credit. But that enterprise, and that's where I think what makes a difference is you have to look at interventions from the context of this frame, where frugal innovation leading to major transformations.
So now, push given at that stage is what delivers more.
That's right.
Than given at particular. But going back to the original question, Mr. Sinha, and in terms of what broad yardstick should be applied? 1, 2, 3, 4. How should we look at? Social structure is of course one. Social support is another. And as you're pointing out, putting in money where it delivers more results.
Yes. That's why, in a manner, I mentioned about 4 sectors in the beginning, because that's where our deficits are. Infrastructure, social protection, human development, and the removing the asset base of the poor. Now, this in a way is a broad thrust that most developing nations need. Different provinces and states are at different levels here. But having said this, given our governance deficits in, say, schools, government schools, given our deficits on the health system, we've seen it in COVID and Corona, how while the vaccination did very well, it's a record that we've been able to push so much of. It happened only because we had a pipeline available in the system for vaccination. But a similar, the thrust on public health, which everybody is realizing after these pandemics. So I think all that is going to cost money. Health, education, and globally, the message is very clear that these are sectors where public investments are required, and that much as the private sector can run enterprises and do many things, given the information asymmetry and given the needs, there are certain sectors where market failures happen and public systems,
will have to play
credible public systems are needed. Health is one of them. Education from an equity perspective, you actually require investments, and there are many states in the country which clearly establish why we need to do this. So I would argue that, for example, a state like Jharkhand or even Bihar, where again, the other change which you find besides the expansion of the livelihood mission in the whole country, today we have about 85 million women as a part of this system. The other change we notice in my own home state of Bihar, till 15 years ago, at the secondary school level, you had 36% girls, rest of them, 64% were boys. In most of these northern and eastern Indian states also, whether it is Orissa, West Bengal, Assam, we are moving towards a 58-62 or a 59-61, which is a very positive thing, which means a lot of what has happened in the southern states is also happening in these other states. So I think this is what is going to change governance. Similarly, the local government or the panchayat government, how does one improve governance? We've been talking about decentralization. Governance improvement comes through countervailing presence of community connect and community organizations with social capital, like the self-help groups, for example. So I think in many ways, governance improvements and priority expenditure areas, which make a difference to overall well-being, as also secure a rate of growth, which is good enough to release resources to invest for well-being. I think that's what we're looking for.
Focus on grassroots and on infrastructure there as well, if you have to sum it up. Sandeep, would you agree to this part there, that politics, of course, is a very integral part of the democratic system, but governance, a good governance with, a mix of good politics and good economics is something which perhaps might deliver the results when we're talking about whether you call it freebies or subsidies?
Well, that's the theory part. I mean, I was listening to Sir very carefully. That's the theory part. But see, at the end of the day, for a political party, nothing is bigger than winning an election, right? And
but if you deliver on the grassroots,
no. So the point is that
political results.
The point that I was earlier trying to make is that many a times, the relationship is quite asymmetrical. So, for example, I'll take you back to just before the 2009 election. The UPA government announced a farm loan waiver, and that sealed it for them. I mean, you had millions of people affected by that one single decision. In UP, where it seemed like a close contest between the BJP and the Samajwadi Party, and it was almost a bipolar election, you saw what wonderful results the BJP got, and they were highlighting again and again the Labharti group, and that's why I mentioned Labharti. Now, I know that that's not a freebie. I know that, it'll be considered as welfare politics or welfare economics.
And it was need of the hour.
Given the backdrop of COVID and lockdown, and it was the need of the hour. But, has it put the opponent, the political rival, at a position of disadvantage? Yes, it has. And it is always the case with, look at Chhattisgarh, for example. They've started purchasing cow dung, and very interestingly, they came up with this economy, which is they're focusing on rural economy, where they'll now buy, Gaumutra and cow dung from the farmers. Now, that's direct cash transfer. It is very difficult to counter cash at hand by promises made by a party which is out of power. So that is the point that I was trying to make.
Politics will always remain an integral part, but as Mr. Sinha was referring to, and you're also partly agreeing to, that ultimately it boils down to work being done on the ground, what delivers results as well, and politics mixed with the good economics and good governance as well. So there it is, all about the issue of freebies and the kind of impact it has on the economy. What are the pros and cons here? We thank once again Mr. Sinha and Sandeep, you as well, for sharing your views and insight. We'll come back again with a different topic. Till then, keep watching Sunset Television. Thank you.